In the journey through my recording of the 6 solos for violin by Johann Sebastian Bach, I am inspired most deeply by the music, of course, but also by the people, books and resources I happen to be working with at the time. Each recording feels like a snapshot of my life at that moment, but I inevitably look back later and see and hear things I would now do quite differently. This, however, I see as a good thing. Every musical performance is ethereal and must respond appropriately to time, place, and the person through whom it takes form. The instrument I play is a violin by the Neapolitan luthier Gennaro Vernazza, made in 1755, with pure gut strings on E, A and D, and a silver wound gut G string. No shoulder rest or chin rest, so in Baroque setup. My bow is by Kees van Hemert in The Hague, the Netherlands, and it's a modern replica of the kind of bow, or one of the types of bows, that was used in Bach's time. Although time with the instrument and Bach's manuscript is the greatest inspiration for my performance, I'm also very inspired by the writings not only of David Leadbetter and Jaap Schröder, but this time also by the violinist and musicologist Benjamin Schut, whose book Se Solo Symbolum, the theology of J.S. Bach's solo violin works, I only recently discovered. I personally find that the B minor partita has a much more intimate character than the other 2 partitas in the series, the D minor and E major. The chord of B minor has only one open string, the D, so the general sound world is warm but somewhat covered. To take one practical example, the many A sharps that have to be played with an extended 4th finger on the pure gut D string sound naturally somewhat muted. The practicalities of playing in the key of B minor on the Baroque violin create a specific feel to the key and suggest a certain character or interpretation of the partita as a whole. In the Baroque era, the aesthetic did not require that every note sound the same, and the temper tuning of the keyboard instruments meant that certain keys sounded more resonant or in tune than others. The descriptions of the character of B minor by 2 contemporaries of Bach are typical of the period. Charpentier in 1690 describes B minor as solitary and melancholic. Mattheson in 1713 as bizarre, melancholy and unusual. To me, these descriptions also reflect the unavoidable physical challenges of playing in this key on a violin in Baroque setup and technique, and at first the unevenness in tone quality caused by the non-resonant notes really bothered me. But when playing the Baroque violin, we are constantly listening for resonance. The gut strings naturally create a lot of overtones, and the intonation is guided by the difference tones, which you also generally hear more clearly due to the richness of resonance on the Baroque violin and the lack of vibrato. After quite some time of battling to try to make everything sound even and ringing, I decided instead to just listen to my instruments and try to understand what the different timbres and difficulties were telling me about the music. Bach was a very good violinist himself. Surely he had a good reason for composing this solo violin work in B minor. As soon as I stopped battling and started listening, I started to find inspiration in the quirkiness of this key. Certain notes really do sound dry and unfocused no matter how you play them, whereas others shine and sing. Such contrast. What was Bach trying to tell us with this effect? At this point, I discovered the writings of Benjamin Schut, a musicologist and violinist who has made an extensive study of Bach's solo violin works from the theological point of view. He believes and very convincingly argues that the 6 works together illustrate the life of Christ. Bach's handwriting of the word Partier or Partita is also interesting. The German musicologist Helga Turner, in her book about the A minor Partita, Eine wortlose Passion, points out that the letters J and S become ever more discernible until by the third E major Partita, which, according to Schutt, is the musical illustration of the future union of heaven and earth, or new creation, J.S. Bach is undeniably present. In the first B minor Partita, however, Schutt brings to attention the focus on the number 2. It is the second work in the series of 6. B minor has 2 sharps, or Kreuze, in the key signature. The dances are paired with a variation, or double, and the 2 predominant musical cultures of that time are juxtaposed in a constant alternation between Italian and French movement names. Schutt proposes that the B minor Partita's emphasis on the number 2 may be Bach's way of referring to the dual nature of Christ, the second person of the Trinity. For example, the only 5 movements of the Mass in B minor that are actually in B minor reflect this association. Most tellingly, of course, is the Et incarnatus est, Bach's only setting of the portion of the Nicene Creed affirming that Christ was made man. Accompanying the doctrine of the 2 natures of Christ is the idea not only of duality, but of contrast. For me, as a player, the key of B minor is inherently rich in contrast between the notes and chords that resonate freely and beautifully and the other more difficult, covered sounding notes and chords. On a larger scale, the explicit and systematic juxtaposition of Italian titled dances and French titled doubles in the B minor Partita, however, creates a very obvious and emphatic sense of duality. Schutt goes on to compare the B minor Allemande and the aria Komm, süßes Kreuz from the St. Matthew Passion. The obbligato viola da gamba part of Komm, süßes Kreuz, Come, Sweet Cross, features a marked contrast between the hard, often jagged, dotted figures and smooth, slurred gestures, thus allegorizing the paradoxical juxtaposition of sweet and cross. It is interesting that the soft triplet gester has the final word at the close of the Allemande, just as the epistle of James remarks that mercy triumphs over judgment. Whether this interpretation reflects Bach's true intentions in the B minor Partita or not is obviously a matter of opinion. But as a performer, I personally find the idea inspiring and very helpful as a general concept for mood and character. The Allemande is often the first movement of a Baroque suite of dances and paired with the subsequent Courante, and as such can be considered a kind of prelude to the whole suite. Bach writes the C time signature, indicating a 4/4 time, and the character of the piece definitely requires a steady walking pace. I find it very helpful to be aware of the underlying harmonic structure of the piece as well, which obviously is almost identical to the following double, which is the term Bach uses for variation. It helps to be aware of this not only for intonation and phrasing, but also for maintaining the pulse and the continuity between the two movements. As we can see here, the harmonic rhythm changes roughly every half bar, which suggests a certain type of flow. Even when the Allemande is played very slowly, as I do here because of the huge acoustic in this church I'm playing in, the harmonic rhythm still gives a general feel of two in a bar. When we get to the double, which Bach then notates in cut time, and which is to be played therefore roughly twice as fast as the original Allemande, this faster harmonic rhythm helps keep the audience engaged. David Ledbetter points out that the use of triplets in this piece, which is a very characteristic feature and rare in Allemands before about 1720, hints at a more modern, galant style. Although the fugues in the fast movements of these solo sonatas are archaic in style, in the slow movements Bach seems to be experimenting with new ideas. Here he uses the triplets in a number of different ways. The jagged, wide leaping triplets in bars 10 to 11 are building up to the important chord which signals the modulation to the dominant. Having reached the dominant in bar 12, the triplets are now falling and relaxed. In bar 17, the triplets serve to outline the chords as arpeggios and elegantly juxtapose E minor and C major harmonies. uses the word double, meaning a variation of the piece that came before. And each of the 4 doubles in this partita uses a different variation technique. For this Allemande double, Bach changes from the C or 4/4 time signature to the cut C time signature, which suggests a tempo of about double that of the Allemande. The harmonic structure on which the Allemande double is based, however, is almost exactly the same as the Allemande itself, but now it is twice as fast. And the continuous semiquavers that run above it also give this movement a far busier feel than the original Allemande. Bach also uses articulation in a very distinctive way in this piece. It is very unusual in Baroque music to see an entire movement slurred in 2s like this. Usually slurs are varied to emphasize the melody or provide rhythmic interest. Benjamin Schut points out that this could be yet another reference to the number 2, representing the dual nature of Christ, which is a strong theme in this partita. Musically, however, this pairing also creates a new transparent layer of complexity, an articulation in counterpoint to the Allemande harmonies and melodic features, which are nevertheless still very much present and audible. At first glance, one of the most striking features of this piece is the use of half bar lines, which is a technique Bach seems to use in order to convey a certain sense of flow in a piece. We have already encountered this in the final presto movement of the G minor solo sonata. And here, Bach uses half bar lines once again to encourage flow and suggest a 2-bar feel. The 3/4 time signature also encourages a lively tempo. These ideas are consolidated by the name of the movement. Bach specifies the Italian corrente, which is a running, swift-footed dance and is entirely different to, and not to be confused with, the French courante, a dance which is slow, much more formal and rhythmically complicated. Bach does, however, hint at the complex rhythmic features of the French-style courante by using articulation to great effect here. The contrasting leaping or slurred quaver figurations lend variety and vitality, shifting from half bars to whole bars, on or off the beat, creating rhythmic ambiguity and highlighting the hemiolas. In this double, Bach simply doubles the surface movement from eighths to sixteenths, as opposed to specifying the 2-to-1 time signature ratio as he did with the Allemande double. Once again, there is a fixation on the number 2, as Benjamin Schut explains it, and it appears in these tempo proportions. The direction presto implies a very fast speed with no rubato, though not without subtle phrasing. In the Baroque, one is always aware of the undeniable truth and consequences of the underlying harmonies. At this speed, the Baroque bow naturally produces a non-legato sound, so there is no need to try to get the bow to bounce. The bouncing of the stick creates a natural articulation whilst still keeping the bow hair in touch with the string, and thus allows for some variation of the note length and subtle phrasing. The modern or taut bow, using the sautiller stroke, would produce a row of very even notes. This is a rather mechanical approach, and whilst very brilliant in its own way, is quite a foreign aesthetic in Baroque music. Being aware of the underlying harmonic structure in the form of a basso continuo line helps not only with the continuity, the bass line is obviously the same one as in the corrente, but it is essential for correct phrasing. Better than in this sarabande do we see that solo violin music of the Baroque era is essentially two-part writing comprising a solo soprano and a bass line, whether realized or not, with intermediate voices sometimes distinguishable. The bass line is obvious, so that we don't need to write out a basso continuo line to understand the harmonic structure of the piece. It is, however, helpful to be aware of the 2+2+4 phrasing, which is typical for a sarabande type composition, and which encourages a confident downbeat on the odd number bars. The many four-note chords and simplified rhythms enhances the feeling of a steady tread, but to me it is a delicate, refined, almost innocent person. And I don't sense any heavy cloaks or crowns in this piece. In this double, Bach uses the 9/8 time signature, which implies a rather lighter quaver triplet formation. To me, it has a similar feeling to the famous choral movement from the cantata BWV 147, Herz und Mund und Tat und Leben, known in English-speaking lands as Jesu, joy of man's desiring. Here, Bach also uses the 9/8 time signature for the decorative first violin part. It can be useful to compare the saraband and its double to see and hear how the harmonic rhythm of the saraband is reflected in the figurations and phrasing of the double. In the Baroque, the bourrée was generally seen as a rustic, stamping, vigorous dance with 2 beats in the bar and a strong upbeat. Bach, however, describes this movement as tempo di borea, an unusual derivation of the word bourrée, which, as Benjamin Schut points out, lends itself to a double entendre. The word borea can mean either the dance borea or bourrée, or the north wind, named after the Greek god Boreas. The title Tempo di Borea can therefore be understood in 2 contrasting ways. Firstly, as a dance, which would imply very earthly and physical qualities, or secondly, as a wind. This word is closely tied to the idea of spirit in biblical literature because in both Hebrew and Greek, the same word is used for wind, breath, and spirit. Even though we can never be sure what Bach really was thinking as he composed his music over 300 years ago, as a performer, I find these ideas very inspiring and helpful as a general concept of character. To me, the Borea itself has very much of the character of the dance. It is very human and rollicking. The double, however, seems to gush forward in a heady gust of wind, sweeping up any last remnants of earthly heaviness or worry. This joyful finale raises our spirits and leaves us with a feeling of wonder and elation.